Some of you will have heard this story before, but you're going to hear it again. As many of you know, I've spent a lot of time in Greece, especially on Greek islands, especially when celebrating significant birthdays. Well, some years ago, I found myself on the island of Paxos and staying in a little village called, wonderful name, Logos, the word. And I was there at Easter time, and it was a great experience. That was years ago, but I remember it clearly now. On the Thursday night, it was a fairly quiet kind of evening, and everybody went to church, and the Greek Orthodox, of course, and I went along. I had no idea what was happening, but I was there being part of this special community. Then as the service ended, everybody went home, very quietly. The next day, Good Friday, there was hardly anybody to be seen. But the people I did see were all dressed in black, as I was to begin the service. Black clothes, black hat, black everything. And they didn't speak to each other much, just a little nod, that was all. And they went about their business very quietly and very sadly. It was Good Friday. Then on the Saturday, hardly anybody was to be seen. A few people appeared and just nodded at each other, and they were still wearing their black. They were grieving, you see. It was a very special time of the year for them. They were grieving, they were very sad. And then, on the Sunday morning, it was a different scene altogether. Everybody appeared and they were wearing bright clothes and they were happy and laughing and they were greeting each other with words like, Christos Anesti! And the reply was, Alithos Anesti! Which you'll be surprised to learn means, Christ is risen, he is risen indeed. Well, as I said, it happened a long time ago, and maybe they didn't do it like that now, but it made a big impact on me, and I remember it all this time later. Now, we've heard 2 Bible readings about Easter morning, and we'll be hearing another one shortly. But right now, I want you to imagine the scene in the garden, that first Easter morning. The women are on their way to the tomb to pay their last respects, to finish burying their dead, their friend. Dawn is about to break across the land, and in this moment, just before daylight, the women have come. Yesterday was the day of rest, and they observed it dutifully, obediently, somberly. Now they carry spices to place on his body as their final act of kindness. These are the women who provided for him during his life, and now they want to do the same for him in his death, because they loved him. The male disciples are still hiding, but the women are not. They want to honour their Rabboni, and in their culture this is how you care for the dead, with burial spices. Their steps are heavy, their faces drawn, their eyes bloodshot, tired and dry. They've almost run out of tears, almost but not quite. Yesterday, the day of rest, was their day of tears. Today, they tell themselves, today is the day to finish the job of burying the Lord. Tomorrow, there'll be time for tears again. The Magi, the wise men, had brought Jesus myrrh at his birth. Now these distraught women bring him myrrh again, just days after his death. So, here come the women, emerging from the surrounding trees, the olive trees, the cypresses, wondering how to move the stone and open the tomb. They had seen where he was buried. They knew the place. They saw the size of the stone used to seal the entrance and wonder how they'll ever be able to roll it out of the way. But still, they've come. This is their friend. This is their duty. They'll find a way. Dawn is about to break. Sunlight is chasing them, hurrying towards the horizon as they pad silently across the dewy ground. Daylight is about to crack through the shell of the sky. And finally, In the moment before sunrise, they arrive at the tomb. The shadows behind them are long, light blazes into their eyes, the sun pokes over the horizon. It is finally dawn, and they stare at the tomb. Already the stone has been rolled away. Easter is here. It wasn't there. They'd put his body in the tomb on Friday, but now it's Sunday and the corpse is gone. Naturally, they thought that someone had taken the body, but who and how? Here's how John, the other disciple, remembers it. Early Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and I don't know where they've put him." The tomb had been sealed and carefully guarded. Who could have taken his body? Who would have? The women stood there looking around, seeking the body, and Luke says they were puzzled, trying to think what could have happened to it. Suddenly, two men appeared to them, clothed in dazzling clothes. The women were terrified and bowed low before them. Then the men asked, "Why are you looking in a tomb for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He has risen from the dead." That first Easter morning was not a triumphal celebration. It was a swirl of confusion and surprise and terror and amazement and wonder. The body is gone. The body is gone. Each of the Gospel writers tells the story a little differently. Matthew and Mark mention that one angel was there to tell the women that Jesus was alive. Luke points out that there were two. John emphasizes the story of Mary Magdalene. Matthew mentions a group of women arriving. Luke records that Peter ran to the tomb. John remembers running there too and actually beating Peter to the grave. But you get the picture. Each eyewitness remembered different details and emphasized different things, just like real eyewitnesses do. Nothing phony is going on here, nothing suspicious. You can tell that the writers didn't get together to try to make sure that their facts matched and their stories fitted. Try to imagine the scene if they did. "Okay, you chaps," said Matthew. "One angel or two? What shall we say?" "Two," said Luke. "Definitely two." Matthew nods. "Right, let's say two angels. Everybody got that now?" John carefully writes a number 2 in his notebook. Good. Now, let's nail down the order here. First there was Mary Magdalene. Actually, chipped in Mary. "I was with the other women, Matthew. Then I went to get Peter and John and returned to the tomb by myself." This is getting a little confusing here. Let's just say first it was the women, then Peter. "No, actually I beat him there," said John. I've always been a pretty good runner." "I could have beat you if I was really trying," said Peter. Could not. Look," said Matthew. Let's just lump the two together, okay? Peter and John. Why can't it be John and Peter? Oh, brother. Instead, they tell it like it is. If you look carefully at all 4 accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, as many have done, you won't find contradictions, as many had hoped, but only unity and excitement rolled together in coherent confusion. Try reading all 4 accounts. Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24 and John 20. Then you might get a better feeling for the wild ride they were on that day. It was a roller coaster of questions and joy, of doubt and delight. A new chapter of life was being told in their little corner of the universe. The women had thought that Jesus had gone for good. That's obvious because they went to the grave with the spices to put on his corpse rather than, say, taking an omelette to serve him for breakfast. No one expected him to be alive. No one. They had wrapped his body in grave clothes and placed him in the ground. Now they're coming back to finish the job. And when they couldn't find his body, nobody said, "Well, of course he's alive. What did you expect? He told us half a dozen times that he would rise from the dead." Huh? Nobody said that. Nobody had caught on yet. But then there was the news from an angel. "He's not here, he's risen. Why look for the living among the dead?" Hope riding on the storm of confusion. And they're all disorientated. Like in a movie where the characters find out that they've been in a dream or a virtual reality world the whole time. What's real? What's fantasy? If he's not dead and no one stole his body, then he came back to life. And that's not possible, is it? The past 3 days had seemed like a nightmare, and now everything seemed like a dream too good to be true. The rules of life and death were being rewritten before their eyes. They looked for him in an empty tomb, but he'd already left the graveyard to search for them. And slowly, the truth began to sink in. Jesus had been dead, but he's not dead any longer. He is alive. Really, truly alive. And John, writing in the third person again, tells about his moment of realization in the empty tomb, has this to say: "Then the other disciple also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then they hadn't realized that the scriptures said that he would rise from the dead." John got it. He finally understood. He believed. Dawn had come at last. Luke continues this story as Jesus joins the disciples in the room where they had gathered. As Jesus spoke, he held out his hands for them to see, and he showed them his feet. Still they stood there doubting, filled with joy but wonder. Then he asked them, "Do you have anything to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish. This, I think, is a great part of the story. It's so absurdly human. Jesus had died. He'd been whipped, beaten, tortured, crucified, and then placed in a tomb. Now, a couple of days later, he appears to his friends in a locked room and starts trying to convince them that he's not dead any longer. "Look, my friends, I'm alive. Check it out. Look at my hands. See, does the ghost have flesh and blood and fingers? Can the ghost shake your hand?" And it's good the way Luke says he showed them his feet. Luke, who's a doctor by the way, doesn't say he showed them the scars on his feet, but rather he showed them his feet. So Jesus walks across the room showing that his feet are working properly while the others just stand there in shock. Then he asks, "Have you got anything to eat around here?" Someone checks and said, "There's a little leftover fish here." "Good," said Jesus, "I'm famished." No one could make up this stuff. I mean, if I were in charge of making up a story about a risen Saviour, we'd probably insert some big celebration, a procession, a rock concert, a crusade, or at least a press conference. All the major media outlets would run with it. Instead, the disciples stood there gawking. And then there's the whole business with the broiled fish. Now, if I were making up this story, I'd have the disciples arranging a huge banquet and lots of speeches by important people. Instead it was, "We've got some leftover fish here somewhere, I'll just go and look." I like that nothing in this story is hidden, nothing watered down. There is no spin here. The story is so real and earthy and alive with the curious wonder and ridiculous logic of the truth. Jesus is alive, so why wouldn't he have a bite to eat? He must have been hungry. After all, he hadn't eaten since the Last Supper, and things had not gone so well since then. There's nothing to which we can compare all this. People 3 days dead do not come back to life. We know that. Everything that has a beginning has an end. Everyone knows that, except the Nazarene. He tips life on its head and turns the end of life into a glorious new beginning. Here's how, in a letter Paul wrote to the Corinthians, explained mystical power of the risen Jesus. He said this: "Death swallowed by triumphant life. Who got the last word, O death? O death, who is afraid of you now? It was sin that made death so frightening and guilt-laden and gave sin its leverage, its destructive power. But now in a single victorious stroke of life, all three, sin, guilt, death, are gone. The gift of our Master, Jesus Christ. Thank God." You can read that in 1 Corinthians 15. The gifts of the Master are these: freedom, life, hope, new direction, transformation, and intimacy with God. If the cross were the end of the story, we would have no hope. But the cross isn't the end. Jesus didn't escape from death. Hear that? He didn't escape from death. He conquered it and opened the way to heaven for all who dare to believe. The truth of this moment, if we let it sweep over us, is stunning. It means that Jesus really is who he claimed to be. We really are as lost as he said we are. And he really is the only way for us intimately and spiritually to connect with God again. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? I sometimes get tired of hearing about things that will change my life. Read this book, it'll change your life. Attend this conference, it'll change your life. Follow this diet, it'll change your life. Well, a broken leg will change my life. Going bankrupt will change my life. Catching COVID-19 will change my life. Change is not always a good thing. What I need is not change from one thing to another, but transformation from who I am into who I was meant to become. Only when God's transforming power touches me can I begin to live the simpler, freer, fresher, more creative, more patient, more passionate, more sacrificial, riskier, rawer, more love-driven life God intended for me to have all along. That transformation is what awaits all who will dare to enter the story of God. As Paul wrote, "Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think." And that's why the disciples were filled with amazement and terror and wonder on that first Easter day. God was beginning to transform them. The truth was beginning to sink in. It rocked their world. Everything was backward. Death has lost its stranglehold on life. The hero of the story had won after all. Nothing was as it seemed. But actually, everything was getting back to how it was supposed to be all along. Christos Anesti, alithos Anesti.